What's up, Guru Nation? Let's demystify clinical research. Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Really means a lot to me. I'm on Instagram Live, same username as on YouTube. So look, this one's going to be quick, short. At least I'm going to try. Difference between eSource and EDC. So I could see how people are confused. And it is kind of confusing because it was a lot simpler when it was paper source versus EDC. But I'm old enough to remember when it was paper source and paper case report forms, which is a CRF. So all a EDC is a case report form that's electronic. Okay, electronic case report form, eCRF or EDC for data capture. So electronic data capture or electronic case report form, whatever the case may be, this industry thrives on confusing people. And what I want to do is demystify this stuff. So paper source or eSource, it doesn't matter its source. What does source have to be? Source has to be 6 things: attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and complete. So that source, it's the original, all right? It has to be attributable to somebody. It has to be legible. So if it's electronic, they're all legible. It has to be accurate, and it has to be complete. So that's ALCOAC. This is the good practices for documentation. So whether it's paper source or electronic source, ALCOAC has to be met, and it's a lot easier, arguably, to meet ALCOAC standards using eSource. Now, it's very easy to confuse eSource with EDC because they're both electronic. But that's really the only similarities they have, because EDC, the data capture, and it gets more confusing, but we'll save that for later. It's literally the database that's standardized for getting all the data from the different sites into one place so that the sponsor can run their biostats, so that they can do the data management with it. The data management people can do their thing with the data. Biostats can do their thing, and then they can package it all nicely in one cohesive format in a CSR, clinical study report, and then send that to the FDA. And so the FDA doesn't care what source is used. For example, in a typical study, let's say a typical phase 3, you might have 60 sites participating. So you might have 60 different types of source, right? One site, first of all, the majority of sites are still using paper. But let's just say it's half. Half the sites use paper. Well, each site will make their paper source a different format. Some might have headers at the top, others headers at the bottom, others might put different assessments first. It's just different things, all right? Now, the other half might be using eSource. So some might use Creo, like me. Shout out to Creo, they're a sponsor. Others might be using another eSource. There's a few different vendors. How do you get all this different data from different formats into one cohesive place? That's what the EDC is for. Now, there's a few big players in the EDC space. Metadata is one. MedRio is another. Viva is another. Trying to think which other ones there are. There's like 4 or 5 like big ones. All right. No matter what kind of source the sites use, all 50, all 60, all 100 sites, however many are on a study, they all the data gets transferred into one EDC. And that's how the sponsors can standardize and have a method to the madness. Because if you just have the source and then all you're getting is all the data in different formats and in different silos. You're not getting it in one place. And you need it in one place for the data management team, for the biostats team, and ultimately for the clinical study report, the CSR. Now, what's making this more confusing is that the lines are getting blurred between eSource and EDC because some of these eSource vendors are getting smart. One of them, my sponsor Creo, they have a thing set up on their back end for sponsors to use that says, hey, sponsor, if you select only Creo sites for your study, you have the benefit of not having to pay for an EDC system, or at least not having to break the bank for the EDC system, because we have an EDC thing connected to it. And I don't know the pricing of what Creo sells to sponsors, but it's a lot more cost effective, I believe, for the sponsors to do that. So that we're in the early stages of this here in late 2023, where we might be seeing more of this. The benefit for sites in those cases is the eSource is the EDC. So you eliminate the repetitive process of getting the source and then somebody entering the data into the EDC. The data entry. This is like an entry-level job, by the way. So take what's on the source, whether it's paper or electronic source. After the visit is complete, after the patient leaves, somebody transfers this data to the EDC system. They log in and they transfer it. And then a monitor goes into the EDC system, queries it, checks the source, checks the EDC. So you can argue you're reducing a lot of redundancy by having the eSource and the EDC become the same thing. But as of right now, the majority of studies, they are still separate, source and EDC. There's another vendor, I'm actually on a study, Medrio, and they're known, I mentioned them earlier, as one of the EDC players. Well, in this study, Medrio is also the source. So just like the Creo model I just explained, you go to Medrio, they have a notes feature. So they modified the EDC a little bit because usually in EDC, there is no notes section where you can write for extra information. They added that so that it can be considered a source. It can meet all the ALCOAC-C standards and have a cohesive place, a database where data management sponsors and all that can access the data. So that's already happening. I could remember as early as 2013 for me, I was on a study with a big sponsor, and they said, do not use source. The EDC is the source. And technically, the FDA has no guidance or no regulations on this. I'm not sure if they have guidance. But the vast majority, 99% of the trials still have a source component and an EDC component. Why? Because you need to have a place, which is source, for attributable, legible, contemporaneous, original, accurate, and complete. And then you need a cohesive place for the sponsors to standardize all the data from all the sites' different source into one place. So from an outsider looking in, it makes no sense. I remember my study coordinator, who's now my lead CRC, Katie Welch, like her first week on the job, she actually asked me a question, and it was like an innocent question, but when I thought about it, such a good question. Why do we have to get the data twice? And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, we capture it in eSource in Creo, but then we have to put it in this portal later. And then I had to explain. I basically did this video with her in real time. Like, this is just how it is right now. But those two technologies are merging, slowly merging. The problem is, for this to work, the sites have to agree this is the eSource and the EDC system we want to use. And sites can't choose what EDC system they use, but sites can choose what source they want to use. And again, the majority of sites still use paper, but those sites that do go on to eSource Everyone has their own preferences. These guys might like Creo like us. Another might like another vendor. Another might like another vendor. Another might want to do hybrid and eSource. So a little bit of paper, a little bit of eSource. So the problem with sponsors is they'd rather pick good sites regardless of what their source preferences are. But we are getting to a place in time pretty soon where the source will be just as ubiquitous as the EDC. Meaning, right now as sites, we could care less who the EDC vendor is. We all have our preferences. Metadata is probably most people's favorite just because it's the biggest one. But we don't really care, and we don't choose, and we don't pay for that. But we do care and choose about our eSource and our eReg. But I did an entire video on eReg. So eventually, we're not going to care about the source either because they're all going to be ubiquitous. But for right now, that is the difference. They are slowly merging into one. But that's the difference between eSource and EDC. I would show you screenshots, but I don't even think it matters because, like I said, they're basically the same thing. It's just the alcoac has to be met, and it's very difficult to meet alcoac standards on EDC without tweaking it somehow, like on a study I'm doing with Medrio, or like Creo's doing the opposite way by doing it from the source and making an EDC on the back end. So anyways, ultimately it's the sponsor's decision, but they do need a cohesive place where all the data ends up from all the different sites. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Hopefully that helped. I told you be quick. Don't be confused. Bye-bye.